Hello and welcome to this online presentation of immunity. Immunity as a whole is a concept which is open to many interpretations. In my simple view, it is an interplay between the antigen and the various components of the immune system of the host. Let's say an antigen, which is a microorganism, enters the host and starts utilizing the resources of the host. Now, this microorganism can be a bacteria, a parasite, a virus, or a fungus. During the process of surveillance of the immune system, the immune cells recognize this microorganism, traps it, and clears it from the host. This process of immune clearance is what usually takes place. But when there are certain genetic changes in the invading microorganism, resulting in significant changes in the proteins or resulting in the acquisition of a new virulence characteristic, these microorganisms are able to resist the attack by the immune cells, and thus immune evasion takes place. So, these foreign antigens evoke a response in the host, and this reaction is called as the immunity. Please remember that the foreign antigen need not necessarily be a microorganism. It can also be animal hair, it can be pollen, it can be a dander, it can be a house dust. So basically, any substance which is foreign to the host can evoke an immune response. There are different types of immunity. The first type is called as the innate immunity. As the name itself says, it is also called as a native immunity. It is the immune response or the ability to resist the invasion by the microbes that an individual possesses by virtue of his or her genetic makeup. Please remember that innate immune response is not affected by prior contact with microorganisms, either as a part of natural infection or as a part of immunization. This innate immune response can be non-specific when it is directed to a group of antigens in general, or it can be specific when it is localized to one particular microorganism. Innate immunity can be viewed at different levels. Now, most of the plant species are resistant to the microbes which cause infections in the animals. The same concept also applies to the animals. So this is called as the species level innate immune response. The innate immunity can also differ between different races. The Caucasians are prone to certain infections which do not affect the Western race, and vice versa. This racial difference in innate immune response may also be primarily influenced by the environmental and the socio-economic factors under which most of these races survive. So it might not be a true reflection of the immune components of the host per se, but it can be influenced by the external factors like the socio-economic conditions, etc. Now, when the innate immunity is viewed as a concept from the individual point of view, it simply refers to the differences in the susceptibility to infections between you and me. This individual variation has been best studied in the homozygotic twins. It has been observed that when one twin is susceptible to one set of infections, the other is not. It's a very simple concept. Okay. Even if we don't consider the twins also, let's say there are two individuals who go and play in the rain. One person will catch cold while the other does not. This is a reflection of the innate immune response of the individuals. Now, innate immune response can be affected by several factors. Extremes of age, too young an individual or too old an individual, have their significant differences in the level of the innate immune response. The young individuals are susceptible to infections because of the poor development of the immune system. Similarly, in the older individuals, there is waning of the immune system. Now, both these extremes of ages are prone for development of, or let's say susceptibility of, many infections. Now, if you take for example hepatitis B, the manifestations of hepatitis B usually occur whenever there is a formation of the antigen antibody complexes. So the virus hepatitis B has to complex with the antibodies and result in the manifestations. In the young individual, let's say a child is born from a hepatitis B infected mother, the child will not manifest the symptoms of hepatitis B because the immune system is poorly developed in the child and there is no formation of these immune complexes. But as the child ages or as the child grows up, the immune complexes are formed and the symptoms of hepatitis B manifest in the child. Such children become reservoirs of infection in the community. The second factor which influences innate immunity is your hormones. To explain with a simple example, diabetes is a situation where there is an increase in the blood glucose levels. There is a reason why we advise the diabetic patients to wear the footwear even when they are walking inside the house. The reason is that whenever a small injury or whenever the person suffers or whenever there is a small injury in the feet, the increased blood glucose levels in such diabetic individuals will impair the wound healing, and because of the presence of excessive amounts of glucose, more number of microorganisms gain entry into the host because the microorganisms utilize glucose as one of their resources for metabolism. So that is why polymicrobial infections are quite commonly seen in diabetic individuals. Of course, there are other reasons like decreased sensations or decreased vascularity, But in the concept of, or in the context of innate immune response, diabetic individuals are more prone to polymicrobial infections due to delayed wound healing. Similarly, nutrition also plays a very important role in the immune response, or in the innate immune response. The malarial parasite, Plasmodium species, does not infect an individual who is malnourished because of the decrease in the heme content of the RBCs. Once the nutritional status of the individual improves, the invading malarial parasite survives much better and carries out its life cycle in the host in a better way. So, this vicious cycle between the nutritional status of the host and the invading microorganism keeps repeating depending on the availability of the nutrients or the nutritional status of the host. There are different barriers in the innate immune response. The first line barriers of this response is usually the epithelial surfaces. Now, for example, let's say an organism wants to gain entry through the respiratory tract. Now, if you compare the nasal architecture between the humans and animals, in the animals it is directed forwards, whereas in humans it is directed downwards. So this nasal architecture itself to a certain extent prevents the entry of the organism. Now let's say the organism manages to successfully enter through the nostrils. We have the nasal mucosa, which contains a lot of mucin, which helps to trap these foreign antigens. Let's say this second barrier, or the nasal mucosa, is also bypassed by the microbe. Then we have our cough reflex, which forcibly expels this antigen out of the host. Let's say the antigen manages to still bypass this cough reflex. Then we have the cilia, which traps these antigens and pushes it outwards from the respiratory system. Usually in smokers, the cilia or the number of cilia is reduced, and that is why smoking by itself hampers the some of the barriers of the innate immune response. Now, if it bypasses the cilia, we have the various goblet cells present in the respiratory secretions. These goblet cells, along with the immunoglobulin A, trap these antigens and expel these antigens from the host. Even if the antigen manages to clear these respiratory secretions, it enters the airways and gets trapped in the alveoli, where we have specialized macrophages which phagocytose these antigens and expel them or neutralize them. So friends, as you have noted that in the respiratory tract itself, there are several checks and balances for an antigen to bypass before it successfully establishes itself in the host. Similarly, all the other organ systems like your gastrointestinal tract, genitourinary tract, there are several checks and balances which are in place by virtue of our own genetic makeup that prevents the organism from successfully establishing itself. So in the GIT you have the saliva which has got antibacterial actions, then you have the acidity of the stomach, the bacterial flora, the resident flora in the large and small intestine, and also the peristaltic action of the intestine, which helps in the elimination of the foreign antigen. The lacrimal secretions of the conjunctiva have antibacterial properties, and so also does the flushing action of urine in the genitourinary tract, and the presence of trace elements like zinc in the semen and the acidic pH of the vagina, which renders the organism inhospitable for surviving in the host. Then, of course, there are several antibacterial substances in the blood and tissues. Now, there is a beautiful concept called as microbial antagonism when we talk of the first line barriers. It will be surprising for you to know that a host, a human body, contains about 9 to 10 bacterial cells for every single host cell. So that means we are colonized by more number of commensal microbial flora than the immune cells or than the host cells per se. So this commensal microbial flora is required by the host for its various metabolic functions. This microbial flora breaks down the complex sugars present in the food that we ingest. It helps in synthesizing certain vitamins like vitamin K also. Now, due to the abuse and misuse of antibiotics, this large pool of resident microbial flora gets eliminated. Now, as long as the microbial flora are present in their respective habitats within the host, the pathogen is unable to gain a foothold into the tissues of the host because those sites are already occupied by the resident flora. In situations such as in antibiotic misuse or due to other circumstances where the resident pool gets diminished, the pathogen is able to successfully establish itself in the host and cause infections. So this default mechanism of the resident bacterial flora to prevent invasion by the microbes or the pathogenic microbes is called as the microbial antagonism, where one microbe antagonizes the entry or the establishment of another microbe. The second line human barriers are the immune cells. The immune cells, by immune cells I mean the phagocytic cells. It can be leukocytes, it can also be lymphocytes or neutrophils, or the specialized proteins called as opsonins, which help in the coating of the capsule of the bacteria and thereby enhance phagocytosis of the bacteria. You all must have learnt that in these immune cells, these phagocytes have several granules which are antibacterial or antimicrobial in nature. Similarly, there are also a certain group of proteins which come under the complement system, which also helps in eliminating the microorganism by coating the outer wall of the bacteria and making it accessible to the immune cells, so that the antigen antibody complexes are formed, and the bacteria or the invading microorganism is eliminated. We have a whole group of cells called as the reticuloendothelial cells, which is usually present in your reticuloendothelial organs like liver, spleen, and bone marrow. It can range from the histiocytes, which are nothing but your tissue macrophages, to the monocytes in the blood, to the Kupffer cells in the liver, to the glial cells in the CNS. So this whole array of reticuloendothelial cells helps in clearance of the foreign bodies from the system. We have another set of cells called as the natural killer cells. These natural killer cells possess the ability to attack and eliminate the invading microorganisms without prior specificity. Similarly, interferons enable the host to resist the viral infections. So this is just a diagram of the various components of the reticuloendothelial systems and the various cells of the reticuloendothelial system, which helps in the elimination of the microbes. Phagocytosis is by itself a whole new it's by itself is a process by which the invading microorganisms are eliminated. Once the organism enters the cell, the phagocytic cell, it gets trapped within the vesicles, forming a phagosome. This phagosome combines with the lysosome of the cell and forms the phagolysosome. The phagolysosomes, there is an acidic pH created within the phagolysosome, which enables the destruction of the microbe, and subsequently these digested residual bodies are eliminated through the vesicle to the exterior. So similar to phagocytosis, we also have another process which is a component of the innate immune response. This is called as the inflammation. As you all know, there are different steps of inflammation which leads to the symptomatology. The classic symptomatology, which we describe as calor, tumor, rubor, dolor, and functio laesa. Calor is nothing but the heat, tumor is the swelling, rubor is the redness because of the vasodilatation of the capillaries, and dolor is the pain, and functio laesa is the temporary loss of function of the affected part. So inflammation per se is an effective innate immune response barrier for these invading microorganisms. The other factors of innate immunity is fever. Prior to the availability of the antibiotics, the infectious disease used to be treated by inducing fever. Fever accelerates the physiological processes and eliminates the infection via interferon release. However, this age-old practice is not prevalent now because of the availability of better modes of treatment of these infections. We also have acute phase proteins like C-reactive protein, mannose binding protein, and alpha-1 acid glycoprotein. These acute phase proteins activate the complement pathway, prevents tissue injury, and promotes repair of inflammatory lesions. So in any inflammatory situations, we usually find the acute phase proteins to be elevated in the system. So that's why, for example, common CRP or the C reactive protein is elevated in such situations, and this elevated CRP is a useful marker or an useful indicator of an infective process. So this is innate immunity. We now come to the next wing of the immune response, which is called as the acquired immunity. Now, as the name itself says, this type of immunity is acquired by the host during the lifetime, his or her lifetime. So, acquired immunity can be further subdivided into active immunity and passive immunity. My friends, at this point, I would like to give you a small analogy to further explain the differences between active and passive immunity. Let's say you are going to a garment shop. Okay, now you can either buy the cloth and stitch it according to your size, or you can directly pick up a ready-made garment and wear it. Now, when you go buy a cloth, stitch it according to your size and wear it, this is called as active immunity. And when you go and buy a ready-made garment and wear immediately, this is called as the passive immunity. So what I'm trying to tell here is that the passive immunity is conferred by the ready-made antibodies or the ready-made pool of antibodies which are present in the host. There is no active host participation involved, and it can also be passively transferred between individuals. Whereas active immunity requires an active infection or an active immunization to stimulate the participation of the immune cells of the host. Please remember that passive immunity provides only a short-term protection, whereas the protection is much more durable or for long-term in the case of active immunity. There are two very important concepts that you need to remember related to active immunity. The first concept is called as the lag phase. Now, let's say due to a vaccination, we are exposed to the antigens, and there is a pool of antibodies which is already available in our host immune system against this particular antigen. With an example, let's say we are vaccinated against diphtheria, for example. So we have anti-diphtheritic antibodies in our system. Let's say as we age, we get exposed to the organism Corynebacterium diphtheriae, which causes this particular infection. Because we are immunized against diphtheria by virtue of the DPT vaccine, our body mounts a very successful response against this microbe and prevents the microbe from establishing itself. Now, initially, it is a common understanding, it's a basic understanding that when an antigen enters, we expect the antibodies to be produced. But due to the vaccination, what happens is that it takes time. Due to prior vaccination, it takes time for the these antibodies to be produced, because this organism has to first stimulate the T cells and the B cells, and further the B cells have to be converted into plasma cells, and the antibodies have to be produced from these plasma cells. So there is a slight delay or slight lag in the production of the antibodies following the exposure of the infectious disease during the lifetime of the individual following vaccination. So this delay in the production of antibodies is called as the lag phase. The second term that you need to remember with regard to active immunity is called as the negative phase. So again, there are certain infections which are endemic in one particular part or one particular geographic region. For example, typhoid is endemic in this part of the world, in India. In India, so we all have anti-typhoid antibodies in our immune system. Okay, a pre-existing pool of anti-typhoid antibodies in our immune system. Now, what generally happens whenever an antigen enters the immune system, we expect the antibody levels to rise, isn't it? But in negative phase, this rise is not seen. This is because the pre-existing pool of antibodies which are already present in the host will first try to eliminate the bacteria Salmonella typhi which enters the host. Once this pre-existing pool of antibodies get exhausted, only then the immune cells are stimulated further to produce more antibodies. So here the expected rise of antibodies does not take place following the entry of the antigen because of the presence of this pre-existing pool. Well, there may actually be a reduction in the level of the antibodies followed by a rise. So this initial phase where you don't find the antibody levels to be higher following the entry of the organism, okay, this initial phase, because of this pre-existing pool of antibodies where we don't find this expected rise of antibodies initially, this is called as the negative phase. So in a negative phase, the pre-existing pool of antibodies helps the immune system to fight off the microbe to a certain extent, and only later when this pool depletes, the immune cells will get stimulated or proliferated to produce more and more antibodies. So this is called as the negative phase, and because of the immunization, the memory cells are already present in the case of active immunity, whereas the memory cells are absent in the case of passive immunity. So whenever we have an exposure to the microbe following vaccination, the memory cells will be directly stimulated against that particular microbe, and we are successfully able to resist the infection, thereby conferring immunity to the individual. Because the antibodies play a major role in passive immunity, this particular wing of the immune response, the acquired immune response, does not come into play in the case of immunodeficient individuals. Whereas, this particular wing definitely plays a very important role in the immune deficient individuals, whereas active immunity is the one which does not have a very important role in immune deficient individuals. So I will just correct my previous statement once again. Passive immunity is usually applicable in immune deficient individuals, whereas in active immunity the individual has to be immunocompetent because it is primarily mediated by your T cells and the B cells. Now, having understood that there are two types of immunity, one is your native immunity and the acquired immunity, and also having understood that this acquired immunity is further subdivided into active immunity and passive immunity, we are now going to see the different subtypes of both active immunity and the passive immunity. Now, active immunity is further subdivided into natural active immunity and artificial active immunity. When I say natural active immunity, it simply means that the individual acquires this natural active immunity from a clinical infection. So, the immune response generated by the individual is because of the clinical infection by the microbe, or the natural course of progression of the infectious disease in the host confers the natural active immunity. It can be long lasting or short lasting. All those who have had chickenpox during childhood have sufficient level of natural antibodies against the varicella zoster virus, which will confer lifelong immunity in the individual. This picture shows the Koplik spots, which are characteristic of measles, and in both the situations, chickenpox and measles, the immune response or the immunity which is attained is long lasting. It must be interesting for you to note that common cold is called as common cold because this particular infection can be caused by a wide variety of viruses. It can be from it ranging from a simple rhinovirus to an adenovirus to even the coronavirus. So the immunity that a person develops against cold is quite short lasting because the moment the host generates antibodies against one particular strain of a virus or one group of viruses, immediately there are other viruses or other strains of the same viruses which further come and cause the infection once again. Against this new strain of virus or against this new group of virus, we do not have these pre-existing antibodies. So that is why cold is called as common cold, because it is caused by a multitude of viruses against which there is not enough repertoire of antibodies in the immune system. Similarly, in the case of influenza, the vaccines which we take for the influenza are basically comprising of only the seasonal viral strains. So if the strains which are present in the vaccines or the viral strains which are present in the vaccines invade the host at a later stage, we are protected. But if the influenza strain which is not present in the vaccine invades the host, we do not have the antibodies against this particular strain, therefore we succumb to the infection. Now there is a component of natural active immunity which is called as premonition. This is best explained by the example of syphilis. Now in syphilis, we all know that syphilis is caused by Treponema pallidum. So the primary lesion of syphilis is what is called as the chancre. Okay. Now, premonition is a concept wherein as long as the primary lesion is present, or as long as the primary infection is present, reinfection by the same organism is not possible. Once the primary infection clears, secondary infections are possible. So this is called as premonition. The second subset of active immunity is called as the artificial active immunity. While in natural active immunity, we develop the immune response by virtue of the acquisition of the illness. In artificial active immunity, we are getting this protection by artificial means, or in other words, by vaccines. So we have live vaccines and we have killed vaccines. There are several differences between the live and killed vaccines. So if you actually look at the immunization schedule, you will notice that in most situations, live vaccines are given only in a single dose, whereas killed vaccines are given in multiple doses. This is because the live vaccines actually contains the live organism which is able to which is able to generate the antibodies. That is, they are immunogenic, but they lose their pathogenicity. Okay, so because of these presence of this live organisms, the moment you give one shot of live vaccine, your B cells are constantly stimulated. Okay, and you have a sufficient pool of these memory B cells to fight against this particular infection at the later stages. Whereas killed vaccine, the organism is killed. Okay, in the live vaccine, the organism is attenuated. Okay, the disease causing ability is eliminated, but the antibody producing ability is still present. But in a killed vaccine, you are actually giving a killed organism along with some carriers called as adjuvants, which will help in increasing the reactive surface area of the antigen to which these antibodies can combine. So because of the killed, the fact that the organism is killed in these vaccines, you do not have a sufficient, or you do not have a constant pulse of these memory B cells in our immune system. So you require multiple doses. Therefore, live vaccine parallels natural infection, whereas a killed vaccine is comparatively less immunogenic, of course enhanced by the adjuvants. Now we come to the second type of the acquired immunity, which is called as the passive immunity. Just like you have a natural and an artificial active immunity, passive immunity is also subdivided into a natural passive immunity and an artificial passive immunity. The natural passive immunity is nothing but the antibodies which are conferring the immunity, and these antibodies are passed from the mother to the baby. So the host acquires natural passive immunity by passive transfer of antibodies from the mother. You all know that if you take a look at the general epidemiology or general, let's say, pathogenicity of any infectious disease, we usually say that most of the infectious diseases are described only after 3 months. This is because up to 3 months the baby has got a sufficient level of antibodies to to fight off against infections. You have IgG, which is passively transferred from the placenta. You have abundant levels of IgA from the colostrum, which is present in the mother's milk. Both of these antibodies convey or confer a lot of protection to the child. So that is why usually for up to we usually advise exclusive breastfeeding for up to 6 months. This is the reason is that up to 6 months, by virtue of natural passive immunity, the child is protected against very many infectious diseases. The child gains immunocompetence only by the 20th week of life, when the child secretes IgM antibody. So during your the routine antenatal visits, the mothers are administered tetanus toxoid, 2 doses of tetanus toxoid, okay, at a 1 month interval, because of this very fact that once you give tetanus toxoid to the mother, the antibodies generated against this tetanus can be passively transferred to the newborn baby, and this is also done to prevent the acquisition of neonatal tetanus by the child, because tetanus, as you know, neonatal tetanus especially paralyzes the respiratory muscles and causes respiratory failure and death in the case of newborns. So to prevent this mortality, we always give tetanus toxoid during the pregnancy. Now, artificial passive immunity is one such situation where we give the antibodies just like we give vaccines in artificial active immunity. In artificial passive immunity, we administer antibodies from the convalescent sera or from the hyperimmune sera. Okay, so we have a pool of antibodies either of human origin or animal origin, which are administered passively for the protection. Now, in comparison, the human antibodies are much more better than the antibodies obtained from the animal origin, because of the fact that our host response is much more exaggerated in the case of animal animal antibodies. Okay, so because of these hypersensitivity reactions to animal antibodies, we usually give human antibodies. Now, from the convalescent sera, that is for those patients who have recovered from these illnesses, we harvest the antibodies from these patients, and then we can give antibodies for the artificial passive immunity. Similarly, we can also give a pooled human gamma globulins, which is obtained from a group of individuals in a particular setting who are naturally immune to that particular infection. Now, in the against the backdrop of the COVID-19 pandemic, convalescent serum has been tried as one of the therapeutic modalities because of this reason. Okay, so the idea is that we are trying to obtain the serum or the plasma from the individuals who have recovered from COVID-19, who have these antibodies against these viruses, and we are trying to introduce these antibodies into the naive individuals, that is those who are not exposed to this virus, and we are trying to those who are eliminate this particular infection. So this particular modality has been tried, and this forms a part of the artificial passive immunity. Okay, please remember, the artificial passive immunity or the passively administered antibodies offer immediate protection, but this protection is only temporary. Okay, because once the antibodies are administered, okay, every antibody has got its own serum half life, and after the serum half life is over, these antibodies are catabolized. The next time the same antibodies are administered, the catabolism is accelerated, or it is much more enhanced, because the body or the immune cells recognize these passively administered antibodies now, so the elimination is much more faster. This is called as the immune elimination, and this is also one of the major differences between the passive immunity and the active immunity. So artificial passive immunity is especially useful in those individuals who have uh, suppressed immune responses. Now, in the initial part of this presentation, I spoke to you about a newborn child who is getting this hepatitis B from the mother. Okay. Now, I told you during that time that this particular child will not manifest the symptoms of the infection and can be a reservoir of infection in the community. So, in such situations where we need to offer immediate protection to the children, to such children, from hepatitis B, and also to prevent the reservoir status of the infection of the child, what we follow is an approach called as a combined immunization. So instead of administering only the hepatitis B immune globulin, we concurrently administer hepatitis B vaccine also. Now there are several advantages of doing this combined immunization. While the antibodies offer immediate protection, or they immediately form the complex with the hepatitis B virus and neutralize the virus, we are giving the time for the host, okay, because I told you there is a lag phase whenever we administer a vaccine. We are giving the time for the host to develop antibodies following vaccination. So by the time this antibody pool gets eliminated or gets catabolized, the antibodies generated from the memory B cells or from the B cells following vaccination will come into play, and they will continue the protection that is conferred by the passively administered antibodies. So in those immune deficient individuals, we follow a combined immunization approach, especially for infections like hepatitis B, where we concurrently administer both the antibodies and the vaccine to offer a durable protection. So, apart from this active and passive immunity, there are other forms of immunity which is called as the local immunity. Now, local immunity is nothing but it provides a local defense against microorganisms. So, you are providing the immunity, or the immunity is developed at the site where the organism is multiplying. Okay. Now let us take the case of polio. You have a oral polio vaccine, which is a live vaccine, and you have a killed polio vaccine, which is a injectable vaccine. Okay. Now the advantage of live vaccine over a killed vaccine is that the live vaccine will provide mucosal immunity, especially in the Peyer's patches of the ileum, where the poliovirus actively replicates, whereas the killed vaccine is not able to provide this immunity. So the immunity provided at the site of active replication of the microorganism is called as the local immunity, and this is conferred by the immunoglobulin A. There is another type of immunity which is called as the herd immunity. Now, herd immunity is the overall level of immunity in a community. Okay, let's say this is especially useful in outbreak situations. Okay, like in the present situation. So what actually happens is, let's say we give a polio vaccine, and the people who are already vaccinated, okay, they shed the polio viruses in their secretions, in the fecal secretions, and this polio viruses which are shed following acquisition of the infection, offers protection to the individuals who are not exposed to that particular infection. So this is called as the herd immunity. It is nothing but we are trying to protect the non-susceptible persons with a small pool of susceptible individuals. Okay, so this is called as the herd immunity. So to summarize, immunity can be broadly classified as native immunity and acquired immunity. Native immunity is present by virtue of the genetic makeup of the individual, and acquired immunity is acquired by the individual during the lifetime. The acquired immunity is further divided into active immunity and passive immunity. Active immunity is mediated by B cells and T cells, and it has got two subtypes: natural active immunity, that is due to the infections, natural infections, and the artificial active immunity is conferred by the vaccines. Whereas passive immunity offers a temporary protection, and it is conferred by the ready-made antibodies. There are two subtypes again. You have natural passive immunity, which is transferred from the mother to the baby, and the artificial passive immunity, which is conferred by the administration of the antibodies from the convalescent sera or the pooled human sera. Apart from these types of immunity, we have a local immunity where there is an immediate protection against the infection at the local site of replication of the microorganism. And we have herd immunity, which is nothing but the overall level of the immunity in the community, where we are trying to offer protection or confer protection to the non-susceptible contacts to one particular infection by virtue of immunizing or by the virtue of the susceptible contacts. Okay, so this is in a nutshell about immunity. Thanks for watching.